In this video, we're going to mind the gap, a concept expanded upon by Elena Aguilar in her book, Onward. She calls it mind the gap because it's a reminder to mind or pay attention to the space between a desired ability and a current ability. This framework proposes that we can sort into several groups the things interfering with our ability to do something, and this helps us get clear on what we need to do and offers insight into entry points on how to get there. Just a quick note, we all have gaps, and we'll have gaps as long as we live, and not just around our teaching practice. But gaps are indicators that we can still learn and grow. So this isn't about deficit thinking or about finding weaknesses. It's about paying attention to the space between a desired ability and a current ability. It's about recognizing our true potential and examining what lies in the way of fulfilling it. As a novice teacher mentor, seeing something as a gap as opposed to resistance puts you in the mindset to feed a person's assets. Consider how we think about students in our classrooms. When we see a student struggle or present a non-desirable behavior, we consider what supports and opportunities we can provide them for growth. We see our students through an asset-based growth mindset, and we should look at our new teachers this way too. Let's consider an example. Say you're coaching a teacher around increasing student engagement, and you've described a number of strategies that they could use to get students excited about a topic, get into the lesson, make meaning of the material, and connect it to past and future learning. You've offered them copies from your favorite texts that describe how to do a think, pair, share, organize a fishbowl discussion or Socratic seminar, and so on. And they're not doing any of them. They say, I tried that fishbowl thing and it didn't work. And now they seem unwilling to try anything else. If you're like many of us, you'll start thinking they're resistant. After all, they're not doing anything different, right? But you might also be confused because they said they wanted to work on this. They asked for your coaching in this area. So what's going on? Here's where Mind the Gap comes in. This strategy directs us to pay attention to that gap between current reality and desired ability. If the teacher really does want to work on the area that you're working on, then this tool helps us think about why they're not making that growth. This framework proposes that we can split into 6 groups the things interfering with our ability to do something. This helps us get clear on what needs to be learned and offers insight into entry points to start that learning. The 6 groups are skill, knowledge, capacity, will, cultural competency, and emotional intelligence. Skill is the ability to execute the technical elements of a task or apply the knowledge that they have. If there is a skill gap, then the new teacher may have the knowledge, but not be able to understand how to actually apply it. So back to our scenario. If the new teacher who isn't taking up your suggestions has a skill gap, their classroom management skills might be too basic for them to facilitate a fishbowl discussion. So when they tried it, the kids didn't get enough scaffolding and clear direction about behavior, and it got chaotic. Knowledge is the theoretical or practical understanding of the subject. If there is a knowledge gap, then the new teacher may not have the information they need to make the changes needed. So in our scenario, if the new teacher has a knowledge gap that's playing a role in their inability to facilitate a Socratic seminar, it may be that they are finding it hard to do because they've only read about them and never seen one. Capacity, something we're all familiar with, is the time and resources needed to do something. This might be physical capacity, like not having enough planning time to do all of your planning, but it also might be mental capacity, Like a new teacher has been in a meeting where you got a lot of new information about testing protocols, and now they have a half-day PD on effective PLCs, and by the time they get to their 3-hour grad class on literacy foundations that evening, they have no mental capacity left. It might also be emotional capacity, like they have a sick family member that they're really worried about, and their car just died, and they're not sure they can afford to get it fixed, and they have a potentially contentious parent-teacher conference in the afternoon. There's not a lot of emotional capacity left to take a risk trying something they've never tried before. In our scenario, if it's a capacity gap, perhaps the new teacher is a first-year teacher who's working on so many areas of their practice that they're just stretched too thin to take on this particular learning right now. Cultural competency is the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems different from one's own. If there's a cultural competency gap, the new teacher may not have the skill to navigate cross-cultural differences. In our scenario, maybe the new teacher has a cultural competency gap, and they're afraid that this group of students, who are not from their cultural background, would get out of control if they invited them to do a chalk talk activity out of their seats. Emotional intelligence is the ability to be aware of, manage, and express one's emotions, as well as the ability to recognize, empathize with, and manage other people's emotions. If it's an emotional intelligence gap, the new teacher may not have as well developed a consciousness around their or others' emotions. In our scenario, if the new teacher has an emotional intelligence gap, it's probably that the sound of 30 students talking animatedly to each other makes them feel anxious, or they're just afraid of what would happen if they tried a Socratic seminar and it didn't go well. Now, you may have noticed that we skipped the will gap. Yes, there is such a thing as a will gap, but they are very rare. It's far more common for us to have skill gaps that show up as will gaps, because most of us are embarrassed about saying we don't know how to do something, so we demonstrate a lack of willingness instead. When we pay attention to the space between a desired ability and a current ability and intentionally support for that gap, we are supporting with an asset-based mindset and ultimately helping our new teachers be more successful. If you're wondering what this might sound like in practice, head back to the Great Beginnings February Mentor Resources page for scenarios and a conversation tool.